Hi, this is Dr. Dave, and in this video I want to help you get through your next tech assignment where we're going to solve a system of two equations and two unknowns. Now, what I'm assuming you've already done with your team is you've done the first technology assignment in which you went ahead and found four companies, their corresponding dividend yield, one between 1 and 2, another between 2 and 3, another between 3 and 4, and another between 4 and 5. And then also the betas that go with that. What we're going to do in this assignment is we're going to go ahead and form a system of equations. You see that system of equations right here. We're going to also make sure that we realize what the variables are. We're going to solve those equations for another variable. We're going to make a table for them and then go ahead and put together a graph of the two equations and find the point of intersection. So in this case, it looks like our point of intersection is at, roughly about 44, 55, something like that. So let's get started. Now, the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to create a worksheet for you to work in. So down here on the plus, we can add a worksheet. And we want to name that thing right away. Since this is Technology 2, we'll do T2 underscore, then your last name. Now let's go back and look at our work from Technology Assignment 1. What each team member needs to do is to pick a different pair of companies to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Tootsie Roll Industries here and Diebold, and I need to know how much of my $100,000 should be allocated to each one of those stocks. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click into E1 and I'm going to go ahead and type in X1 semicolon is the value of Tootsie. Below that, I'm going to put a description for X2, my other variable, X2 semicolon, the value of Diebold. By having these two pieces of information here, I can tell exactly what pair of companies you're working with. So we're going to use two pieces of information to come up with our two equations. So the first piece of information we're going to use is we're going to go ahead and realize that we need to invest a total of $100,000. Now I could work with the entire number 100,000, but that would be a little uncomfortable. So instead I'm going to do this in thousands of dollars. And I need to indicate that up here. So I'm going to go and add to what I put in here before, thousands dollars. And the same thing down here after the X2, thousands dollars. So I know that those two stocks combined need to amount to $100,000. So I'm going to type in here the value of the Tootsie, that's X1, plus the value of Diebold, X2, should be equal to 100,000, or in the case of our variables, 100, because remember each variable is in thousands of dollars. That's all it takes to get your first equation. The second equation, that one's a little bit more tough. In this case, we're going to try and come up with a particular dividend amount that we want. Now, since I was dealing with Tootsie and Diebold, Tootsie had a dividend yield of 1.16%, and Diebold had a dividend yield of 4.45%. So if I combine them together, I'm going to get something between 1.16% and 4.45, and I get to choose that. Depending on how I choose it, that's going to give me an idea of how much of one stock versus the other we need. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a 3% dividend yield for my entire portfolio. So that means that I need 3% of the 100,000, which is $3,000 in total dividend yield. So I know on the right-hand side of this second equation, it's going to be equals 3. Now, the amount of dividend that I'm going to get from the Tootsie is 1.16%. So I'm going to get 0.0116 times x1. So that's how much I'm going to get back from Tootsie. Plus, I'm going to get 4.45% back from Diebold. So that would be 0.0445 x2. And in total, those have to give me back $3,000. And remembering that my variables and our money here is all in thousands, that's going to equal 3. So right there is the system of two equations that I'm going to solve. I'm going to go ahead and make this column a little bit wider so I can fit things in there. In F4 here, I'm going to type becomes, and then to be able to graph these, I need to solve each one of them for a variable. In this case, I'm going to solve each one of them for x2. So x2 is going to play the role of y. So in the first equation, I get x2 equals 100 minus x1. That's pretty easy to solve for. And if you solve the second equation for x2, you get x2 equals 3 divided by 0.0445 subtract 0.0116 divided by 0.0445 times x1. You don't want to do any rounding here because doing rounding, that means you're going to get a slightly different point of intersection on the graph. So click outside of that. Those are the equations that I'm going to use to generate the columns in my table. So let's go create those tables. So I'm going to start out with some headings here. The first thing I'm going to need to do is put down x1. And remember, that's the value of the Tootsie stock. So that's in thousands of dollars. I'm going to make that a little bit wider here. So I'm going to click and drag that over. Now, remember that the first equation was the total value of the money. So I could go ahead and call that the total investment. And remember, the second thing here is the total return. So I'll say total return. You can name these things anything you want here. Just make sure you understand what's in each one of these columns. All right, so since I have $100,000 to invest, I know the amount that's going to be in Tootsie is something from 0 up to 100. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to click in A2 and put in 0. And then I'm going to click in A3 and type in 10. So that my table I'm going to create by tens here. Now I could go and click on 0, 10, 20, 30, 40 and do all of those numbers in that column. But instead, I'm going to do a little bit of a shortcut here. I'm going to click in A2. I'm holding my left mouse button down, and I'm going to drag it down to A3. Notice that both of those become highlighted, and there's this little blue box here. I'm going to go up, put my cursor on that, hold the mouse button down, and drag it. Watch what happens. If I drag it down to A11, it fills all of the boxes in here for me using the pattern that I established in A2 and A3. Now, since I want to go all the way to 100, I'm going to grab it a little bit more and go one more. Right away, I've gone ahead and filled this in with the values. And I'm going to do the same thing for these other two columns, but when I do that, I'm going to use the formulas that I found over here. All right, so let's go ahead and go up to B2. Click there. I'm going to type equals, because I'm typing in a formula that I want it to calculate, 100, subtract, and now I want to subtract x1, and the values of x1 are right here in column A, so I'm going to click on A2. Press enter, and it goes ahead and calculates that value. Now click on B2, find that little box there, hold your mouse button down and drag it. And you can see that every single combination in here leads to a total investment of $100,000. Now let's do the same thing for the return. So I'm going to click in C2. I'm going to use my formula that I came up with before to write equals 3 divided by 0.0445, subtract 0.0116 divided by 0.0445 times, so I'll need to hit the star key on the keyboard, and now I'll click on the A2 because that's the value of x1. Hit enter, and it goes ahead and calculates that value. I'm going to click on C2, grab that little fill box, and fill everything in. So these are all the possible values for x2 when x1 is over here in this column that lead to a total return of $3,000. So now that I've created my table, I'm going to go ahead and click on A1, hold the mouse button down, and drag it down to the bottom of the table. That selects the table. Now let's go ahead and graph it. So go up to Insert, Chart, and normally it makes some recommendations here. I don't see what I'm looking for, which is just a line chart. So I'm going to go to Chart Types and select Line. You can see it's filled in some things here. It says row 1 is the headers, which is true. Column A are my labels. Those are the things along the x-axis. That's what I want. And in fact, if I look over here, it's giving me a preview of exactly what it's going to want to put in. Now, I'm not too thrilled with some of these things, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and click on Customization, and I'm going to go ahead and change a few things. So for the title, I'm going to change that to Investment Portfolio, and when I do that, it updates it for me. I'm going to scroll down to where it says Axis. And right now it says in the horizontal axis is X1 in thousands of dollars. I'm pretty good with that. But now I'm going to go to the left vertical and I'm going to say X2 also in thousands of dollars. There are lots of different things I can do. I can change colors. I can go down and change the colors of my lines and the size of my lines, things like that. But for right now, this looks pretty good. I like the label here. It tells me which equation is which. And I think I'm ready to go ahead and insert it. When it inserts, it may not put it in the best place of all, so I can go up to the very top of the graph and grab that, holding my mouse button down and drag it over. So that looks pretty good. If there are some changes you still want to make to it, you can go up here, click on the graph, and then go select Advanced Edit. And that'll take you back to that customization where you can make changes. You can also work on changing things in here just by double clicking on things. So for instance, if I were to double click on that line, it would give me an opportunity to change some colors and things like that without going into the advanced edit. You can play around with that and see what you come up with. So the key thing I'm going to be looking for here is that you've got a title of some type. You've got a legend over here that tells me what type of equation these are, and that you've labeled these axes correctly. Remember, each student in your team is going to have a different pair of companies, and each student may even have a different return. I picked a return of 3% here, but of course, if you picked a stock that had a 1% return and one that had a 2% return, there's no way that you would be able to combine those together to get a higher return. In fact, you always get a return that's in between. Now, once you're done with this, you don't have to do anything. By completing it right here, I have access to it, and after the due date, I can come in, grade it, and give you some feedback in a document, which I will leave in your shared folder.